All right, happy Friday, all. Coming to you live. Well, live for me, not live for you by the time you watch this, from my house. And happy Friday. Just wanted to give you a really quick video lesson on what we'll be learning about today, which is the Cuban Missile Crisis. You can see it under the date heading 5/1/2020. And some of the things you're going to do today. You're going to develop background knowledge by watching a very quick TED Ed. It's about 4.5 minutes long. You're going to compare the leaders that were involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis. That would be Nikita Khrushchev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union at the time, Fidel Castro, who was the leader of Cuba, and John F. Kennedy, who, of course, was the president of the United States at that time. And then finally, you're going to wrap things up by taking a look at two political cartoons and choosing one you think best represents the Cuban Missile Crisis. So let's start with what the heck is the Cuban or was the Cuban Missile Crisis? Well, what happened was you had, of course, remember this is right in the middle of the Cold War. This is 1962. And you had all sorts of competition going on between the Soviet Union and the United States, and that included with, especially with nuclear weapons. Okay, so the United States, they had a bunch of nuclear weapons in Turkey, which was really close to, and is really close to, the Soviet Union, or what was the Soviet Union. It's now, Russia. And so what the Soviets did was they shipped nuclear missiles to Cuba, which is about 90 miles off the coast of Florida. And once we found out, it became a big deal. So I'm just going to show you a couple of images. This is a map of Cuba. And this is, in 1962, the president was briefed on this and said, hey, this is what we found. What do you want to do about it? So, as the president, you want a strong response, but at the same time, you don't want it to be so strong that it starts a nuclear war and it's the end of the world, right? So, he would be briefed and is shown this map. And all these little red spots here, those are all the locations of the different nuclear weapons. You have some surveillance photo taken by a U-2 spy plane. U-2 spy planes flew very, very high up in the sky, almost in space. That's how high up in the sky. Really cool planes. If we had time, I'd do a whole lesson on it. I've done it in years past. If you have the time, look it up. Pretty amazing stuff. And so this is what they found in their surveillance. It's hard to see. Let me see if I can show you. But there are tents up here. Okay. Over here is a convoy of trucks that most likely had nuclear missiles. Okay. And down here, you also have what I guess you would call missile trailers. Okay. Some more images here. Again, just satellite images proving that in October of 1962, there was all sorts of stuff going on in Cuba. And think about how you might feel if you're an American. It's the height of the Cold War. You are afraid to death of the Soviet Union taking over the world, communism taking over the world. You're really fearful of nuclear war. I mean, so much so that, if you're a kid, you're doing nuclear bomb drills. So think about how freaked out you would be if you hear, hey, there are nuclear weapons and they're very close to the U.S. And then this is surveillance video from a low-flying plane, and you can make out even more all the nuclear missiles that were on the island and all the work they're putting in to get the island equipped. And this is the range of the missiles that the missiles might be capable of. These two circles here are the medium range missiles. Those are the missiles they thought were on Cuba. These are long range missiles, most likely not on Cuba, but still look how many major cities they can hit with nuclear bombs if they so chose, including Washington, D.C. So obviously everybody was on edge. And then here's just a picture of one of those nuclear missiles. Okay, so here were the options that President Kennedy had. He could just ignore it and do nothing. He could give the Soviets and Cubans time to remove the missiles. And if not, launch some sort of airstrike against Cuba and the Soviet Union. He could open a discussion with Castro and Khrushchev. Talk it out, launch a surprise airstrike, basically bomb them without any warning. Or he could quarantine Cuba, which is basically he wouldn't allow anything in or out of Cuba. So that island over here of Cuba, he would surround them. It's called a naval blockade with a bunch of ships, so nobody could bring any more nuclear weapons in, and nobody could leave. And ultimately, that's what he decided to do. It was a strong enough response that Americans and his allies thought, hey, he's taking a strong stance on this, but not so strong that it was going to start World War III and the end of the world. So that being said, here's your lesson for today. Part one, you're going to watch this video and you're going to click where it says, click here for Cuban Missile Crisis video. Again, it's about 4 minutes long. It's a TED Ed. It's pretty entertaining. If you're watching this video, you could probably get away with not watching, if you're watching this video lesson, I should say, you could probably get away with not watching this Cuban Missile Crisis video. If you so choose, if you're pressed for time or whatever, that's fine. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to type a summary about the Cuban Missile Crisis using these 7 keywords. Well, again, if you were listening to, if you're watching this video lesson right now, you could do that based on the information I just gave you without actually watching this video. So we've got the Soviet Union, the United States, Cuba, Castro, Kennedy, Khrushchev, and quarantine. So we've got the 3 major countries involved, right? We've got the 3 leaders of each country. Castro was the leader of Cuba. Kennedy was the leader of the United States. And then, of course, Khrushchev was the leader of the Soviet Union. And we've got this word quarantine. Well, we know that the United States, Cuba, and Soviet Union were a part of this Cuban Missile Crisis. We could say the Soviet Union let's try again. Soviets ship nuclear weapons to Cuba, and they were very close to the United States. Hey, guess what? In one sentence, we just took care of 3 words. From there, you could talk about each leader and which country they led. You could say Castro was the leader of Cuba, Kennedy was the leader of the US, and Khrushchev was the leader of the Soviet Union at this time, and maybe put 1962 in parentheses. Again, this is just to help you. You don't have to do this. And then we still have that word quarantine. Well, how are we going to use the word quarantine? Well, if you remember back from a couple of minutes ago, Kennedy had a bunch of different options to choose from. You know, he could do nothing, or he could straight up airstrike them and bomb them without warning. He chose something in the middle, which was quarantine. If you remember what quarantine is, I mean, I know we've been using that word quite a bit, right? But quarantine is, remember, not allowing anybody in or out of Cuba by basically setting up a bunch of ships surrounding the island. It's called a naval blockade. So Kennedy decided to quarantine Cuba by not allowing anything to come in or out of Cuba. And look at that. Perfect. Nice response. You're free to use that if you want to. This is the advantage of watching these videos, guys. All right. So from there, what you're going to do is you're going to watch these 3 videos. I find them to be pretty entertaining and interesting. And here's what you're going to find in these 3 videos. Each one has to do with the 3 leaders that were involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy, Nikita Khrushchev, who of course was the leader of the Soviets, and Castro, who of course was the leader of Cuba at the time. And what you're going to see in each video is a story from their past to kind of give you an idea of, well, this is where they were coming from. This is why they decided to act in the way they decided to act during this Cuban Missile Crisis. The importance of the past, right? The importance of experiences and how that can lead to decision making later on in your life. So what you're going to see is John F. Kennedy. They'll tell a story. There will be a story about when he was in World War II and what he saw with the Japanese and how that influenced his decision making during the Cuban Missile Crisis. You'll see this with Nikita Khrushchev as well. Another story about his experiences during the war. And then you'll see for Fidel Castro a story, which is a pretty crazy story about a game he came up with involving a bike and a brick wall. And that will really give you an idea of what kind of person Castro was and where he was coming from. Once you're done watching each of those videos, you're going to tell me what four different questions for each. So, start with Kennedy. What country did he lead? Well, he led the U.S., right? You're going to summarize the story. You're going to tell me how this story helps to understand his personality and the impact it played on his decision-making during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then finally, you're going to tell me what are his goals during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which they will mention for each one of these in the video. Okay. Once you're done with that, last thing you're going to do, part 3, wrapping it up. There are 2 images here with the Cuban Missile Crisis. We've done this quite a bit in class with political cartoons. And I want you to choose which of these 2 images you think best represents the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, they both represent the Cuban Missile Crisis. And there's no wrong answer, but I want you to tell me by typing your response in this box here, which one do you think represents it better and why? Well, let's quickly take a look at what we got here. We have, first one, you have the image of like a monster coming out of a box here. And who do we have? We have Kennedy, And Nikita Khrushchev, this is a picture of Nikita Khrushchev, remember, the leader of the Soviet Union. And what are they trying to do? They're trying to keep this monster from popping out of the box. It even says, let's get a lock for this thing. And on the box itself, it says nuclear war. So what are they trying to say? In this cartoon, they're trying to say that the threat of nuclear war was almost like a monster. And even though these two really, the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, did not like each other, neither one really wanted nuclear war, because they knew what could happen with nuclear war happen, which would be the end of the world. So that's image one. Image two, again, this guy on the left here, bald guy, like his haircut. That's Nikita Khrushchev. Guy on the right here, nice parted hair, John F. Kennedy, the president of the United States. What are they doing? They're arm wrestling. And it may be hard for you to see, but each one of these guys, see Kennedy's finger? It's very close to touching a button that's going to set off an H bomb, which is basically, it's a hydrogen bomb. It's a much more powerful nuclear weapon than the atomic bomb that was dropped on World War II. So think about it. Which image do you think best represents what happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis? Once you're done with that, please make sure you turn this in. And I will just remind you, as I do on every video, I am available in this Modern Global Class Google Meet link right here. You click on this, and during our class time, which is 10:15 to 11:15, I will be there sitting, waiting to answer your questions, any questions you have at all. If that time doesn't work for you, you're not awake, or you are busy doing something else, that's fine. You can do it anytime, and you can always reach out to me and email me and ask for help if you need it. And one final thing, I am messing around with this Google Chats feature. See if I can find it. Come on. Okay, here it is. Okay, and so what this Google Hangouts chat feature is, and I invited all of you, is rather than going live on video at 10:15 in the morning, maybe that's too early, as I said, or you can chat with both me and your classmates. And, maybe you just want to say hello. That's cool. Maybe you have a specific question. You can throw that in the chat. And the rest of us could help you out if you need the help, or at least I can. So just another way to connect. Okay, so thank you for bearing with me and staying with me. I hope you made it all the way to the end of the video. I hope you find these videos helpful. You're welcome to leave a comment and let me know what you think. All right, take care, guys. Enjoy your weekend. It's supposed to be beautiful out.